Great. We're now going through a TADSummit Revisited with Vinay Kumar from Telus around his experiences in building a successful API. I'm going to get right down to the questions, Vinay. In your presentation, you highlighted the importance of using APIs across the customer's journeys with Telus. Which APIs are most often used in those journeys? How did you create them? And how do you meet the requirements of the different customer groups across those different journeys?
Hey, Alan, that is a good question. The Telus journey started with building APIs. This is about 8-10 years back. Off of network elements. So the initial APIs that we generated were straight up, deliver an SMS message, MMS message, location-based APIs. Those are the ones we learned our lessons from. And as they were robust enough and as they were accepted by the industry, we then built APIs more on the BT or the IT side of the industry, which is where we provided, not only the network subscriber profile, but also the services profile of what a customer is, what are the services he has, and then matured into the billing APIs, bill on behalf of, and those kind of APIs. So that was kind of the journey we at Telus had, and I think that would be pretty typical of most of the operators in how the APIs got built and how we learned from those APIs.
Gotcha. So it started off focusing on network elements and then moved towards more IT requirements. So part of the question also focused on how you meet the different requirements of the different groups in terms of scalability, performance. Just we had several people asking how you manage the multiple requirements you face from both internal and potentially external customers.
So the way we approached it, the initial platform that was put in 2008, we didn't know what to expect. So it was, a decent platform. But by 2011, we obviously saw capacity constraints start popping up on that, right? And this was based on the industry using these APIs and how often they were calling the API. So in 2011, 2012, we went through a significant uplift on our hardware. We have not limited in terms of capacity, whether you're an internal partner or external partner. We do have mechanisms at the back end to throttle if required. So if there's any abuse, we have mechanisms to throttle. But what we have done is tell us we've significantly invested in the capacity of the platform because we expect there to be a significant uptake on the APIs, and that has demonstrated itself from 2012 till now. So we've actually seen that, right? It was, we did a good job, and we are bearing the fruits for it. So.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, it's always a graph I show in terms of once you get it right, once you understand the processes, once you get the organization bought in, it's a hockey stick. It's the classic hockey stick. Cool, so that's good. So moving on then, who's the biggest consumer of your APIs?
So the APIs are used both by internal partners and external partners. And by internal partners, I mean other projects, other organizations, other teams within Telus use our APIs. The reason it becomes a little tricky in answering the question is we use our own APIs as well. So for example, if the marketing team is running a campaign, they may outsource the campaign to a partner, but the partner then uses those APIs. So is it really Telus calling those APIs? No, it's an external partner, but it was done for Telus, right?
Gotcha.
Same thing with self-serve. So self-serve, where, whether it is the Telus.com or the My Account app, there is significant users of our APIs, but they may outsource the work to a third-party developer as well. So there may be third-party developers calling those APIs.
Interesting. Okay. Because that's, well, I guess every operator is different. I mean, we see definitely with self-serve, a lot of operators using that internally. But that's an interesting model. So for running some campaigns, for performing certain functions, Telus uses third-party developers. So it's still a Telus project, but you're using a system integrator or some local partner to help you in executing those particular functions.
Right. But they use our API, so they're coming back into our network, right? It's just they're executing it on our behalf.
Gotcha.
So it might be internal or external. But if I just count, based on the clients who are calling me, internals is significantly a larger number.
Yeah.
So the reuse internally is significantly larger, and the cost savings we garner from it would be quite large as well.
Gotcha. And is it like a sort of 80-20 split, roughly, or 90-10?
Because of the reasons I mentioned earlier, it becomes difficult to put numbers on it.
But roughly.
But yeah, but the internal ones is significantly larger.
Yeah, because
it's
an interesting shift. And I think you've reflected it quite accurately right at the start, that in the beginning, it was very network component based. And we see, for example, Telecom Italia, where it was 50-50 split between internal and partner use. But they've seen that shift as they've taken the same journey you have in having far more internal or sort of Telecom Italia project-based work. So it's shifting towards the sort of 80-20 split. And we're seeing in some operators where they, from the start, consider this to be an internal IT project, it almost being like a 95-5 split, where the actual external use is very small.
Right.
But cool. That's good to understand. And it reflects every operator is in a different market and uses their APIs in part because of, what parts of their processes they've currently automated through APIs. Sort of extensive automation. Some have relatively limited. So one question, and this comes up time and time again, and we had several operators asking this, is how do you limit API sprawl? How do you maximize reuse of APIs rather than having yet another group come to you and asking for their special API?
Yeah. So to be fair, we have had our share of API sprawl as well. It is a problem that every operator has. We can't say that we have solved it, right?
No.
But we organizationally we have made certain steps, especially over the last couple of years, in trying to control the sprawl. So one of the initiatives we put in, when projects come to the various governance bodies, they need to articulate which are the capabilities you're reusing, which are the capabilities you're going to build, and kind of quantify that. So depending on the stage of the project, at the beginning you may just say, hey, I expect to reuse these capabilities. Project is delivered, we actually expect you to come back and tell us, did you reuse those capabilities? Or if you built new capabilities, how many did you build? So it kind of forces the project teams to think through the reusability question. Don't go build your own API.
Exactly, yeah, because it's a cost.
Exactly, it is a huge cost. As well, in 2016, we have specific metrics that have been put on the leadership team to ensure that reusability happens in terms of APIs. So the different technology leaders have their KPIs associated with the reuse of APIs. So kind of it's a top-down initiative as well, that, hey, you need to reuse the functionality and the capabilities you have in the network today. Yeah.
So that raises, I think, and this is in terms of how responsibilities are decided. Is the sort of group that owns the API management platform, are they responsible for defining the APIs and creating the APIs, or is it an intermediate group, or is it actually the consuming group? So marketing, product management, other groups, are they responsible for creating their APIs within Telus?
Today, it is the backend team that is responsible for creating it. We would like to get to the maturity where it is the product management team that owns and manages the API and really treat the API as a product, but we are not there. So hopefully in the next TADSummit, we might be able to come and say that we have got to that level of maturity. But at this stage, it is the backend technology teams that defines the APIs based on the requirements they have received.
Gotcha. That's clear, because that, again, is one of those aspects which has a big impact over reusability. And I've seen a couple of example operators where, it starts with the back-end team. There's no way around, because there's a selling process. And also, every group sort of looks at it, oh my God, that's technology, solve it for me. So there's a certain amount of, you start off with a core team that's building the APIs, but then they want to get the rest of the group making, creating the APIs that are right for them, because it just becomes a long list of products to get out the door. But then you hit, once you start sort of handing over responsibility, everybody has their special requirement. So then they sort of realize the fun in being able to create something very specific to your needs. And you then start to see this massive sprawl as you sort of give it out to the rest of the organization. And I've seen in a couple of cases, operators almost like having to haul it back in to say, guys, it's gone too crazy. We need to sort of, across these APIs, ensure reuse and to stop some of the more creative, because you know how it is. People will look at using, APIs in very creative ways that, let's face it, the API management platform wasn't even designed to be able to support, but meets their needs very well.
Yeah. So we've gone through that stage, and I think right now in that journey, as you described it, Telus is at the point where we're kind of pulling back and saying, okay, we've had our sprawl, let's try to get it in control. And that's the focus of the leadership having the metrics on reusability, saying, hey, you need to ensure that you reuse stuff rather than build new capabilities, because you likely are creating sprawl, right? Let's reuse stuff that we already have.
Exactly. And it is, they're experimenting. So they'll build an API and then it'll get forgotten. So all of a sudden you find there's a whole host of stuff that's being created that isn't being used. And people, of course, will then start digging in. They'll say, oh, well, we can reuse this. And of course, it's not been in active use. It's not that well documented. And there's a whole host of operational issues, bro bumps that happen along the way. So moving on to the next question. And this is moving more on the business side. For APIs used for business solutions, let's say fleet management, do you work with product management, marketing, sales, or the enterprise directly?
We typically work with the enterprise directly. Yeah. The relationship, many of our partners are, compared to Telus, in terms of their organization, is pretty small. And so we directly work with the enterprise. Yes, we may, depending on the stage of the development, we may initially work with their product management team in defining what the fleet management solution in your example is, what capabilities they need to hit. And then we may also work with the sales team to ensure that they have a robust sales plan.
There you go. You're back again, sorry.
To support. Oh, did I drop out for a minute there?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure. It could have been just my end, because that's the one of the magical things with Google Hangouts. You can have a really bad hangout, and then when you look at the recording, it actually looks quite good. So I think it could have been my leg. But let's assume we got most of what you were saying there. So if you could repeat it for me, though.
All right. So as I was saying, we typically work with the enterprise directly. Our partners are usually much smaller and agile companies, and because they're smaller, we directly work with the enterprise. We may start off working with their product manager person in defining what are the requirements, making sure the APIs we have meet all their requirements. We may work with their sales team as well to make sure that they have a good revenue stream associated with it, because that's important. You want to launch applications that are successful in the market, that they've thought through the sales challenges around it. But because they're smaller organizations, it's not a very tedious or process to work with them, right? It's we work in a very agile manner in that sense.
Exactly. And that I'm seeing more and more where responsible for actually with the sort of management, the product management, sort of the IT organizations within enterprises, and creating very interesting products and services and solutions to specific business problems. And it creates a lot of lock-in. Now, the revenues are interesting, don't get me wrong, but what I find quite interesting in a lot of these cases is there's almost like there's a sort of people lock-in aspect, and then there's a technical lock-in aspect, as that end business has sort of hooked in its some of its business processes into a particular telco. So very interesting models we're seeing emerging in the market there. So moving on in the question. Are you working with any, we've already sort of covered that one. So that's, sorry, I was just quickly looking through. Oh, yes. Question 8. Send Mobile talked about going beyond APIs. So this is scripts and web forms, making it so damn simple that almost any customer can use the capabilities. Have you been looking at such an approach?
So after the last TADSummit, I did look at what Ascend was doing. We had a good conversation after to talk about what this forms and scripts are, and
Yeah.
but it is not something that we have seen a significant demand of in the Canadian market. With some of our partners that we worked with, they're still happy with working with the APIs and giving them the flexibility that they want to build. It's probably a difference in the market itself, where in the North American market, they are willing to invest more to have a very custom customer experience, right? Very unique to that app, or very unique to the service that they're willing to provide in the market, and their consumers are willing to pay for that unique service. So having generic forms or scripts, we haven't seen the demand yet, but it is something we are tracking because it was very interesting.
Yeah, and we see, for example, with Tropo, they have some very simple scripts, their lines of code. You can create quite powerful services. In fact, we had Thomas Howe showing that at one of the hacks in TED Hack Chicago last year. So I think even within the North American market, we have seen some simplification. But I agree. To date, we haven't seen it take off as we've seen in some of the emerging markets. Now, I agree. There's a sort of developer maturity, but also I think they've been tackling different groups, so that they've been offering capabilities where it really isn't a developer they're talking to. It is this, especially with small medium enterprise, it is actually the business owner, and they're wanting to add in an alerting function or something like that. So I think it's, as I guess APIs get more prevalent, as we look at addressing beyond just the sort of core developer community, I think we might start to see that pop up a little bit more. But again, it's very early days there.
Exactly. It is early days, and it's something we are tracking as well, just to make sure, we are aware of the industry trends, and if we see it happen here, then we are ready for that.
Exactly. No, that makes a lot of sense. So what have been your biggest challenges you faced in managing your SDF, and how did you overcome them?
So I had a full slide on that at the TADSummit. Some of the significant challenges we faced, there are a couple. We already talked about the sprawl. That is something that we've struggled through in other operators as well.
Yeah.
The other challenge we have is in terms of articulating the business case of a net new capability.
Yeah.
Right? Even though you have demonstrated success with the past capabilities, when you bring in net new capability, a business capability, not a specific API, but a business capability, and say, this is something that's required by, even if you line up 4 or 5 projects, the organization looks at it as, okay, that's projects that are required next year. It doesn't bring me revenue in year. So we still have the challenge of convincing the various governance bodies and the leadership, and how do you fund work for this year, which brings in revenue in the next year or even 2 years out, right? So that investment cycle and that thought process is still something we have to go through, and that's because as an organization, everybody is focused on in-year revenue, where's the profit, and how do you bring in the money, right? The other challenge we have is in terms of alignment across the different project teams. So, typically a project team works in its own silo. They have their own roadmap. They're working in the silo, but who is stepping back and looking at the different teams, be it big data, M2M, IoT, health, and so forth, and saying, hey, maybe there's commonality. Who is trying to find that nugget of information which is common to all of you, or at least some of you, so that we can build it outside and do it once, do it right, and make sure you all use the same capability, right? So those two are, I think, some of the bigger challenges other than the sprawl as well.
Yeah, but that's a very good point. And I see this a lot of telcos struggling on this specific topic around the opportunities emerging, and we want to make an investment now so that we can respond when the clients need it. So there's that investment cycle, and every time it's this, what's the business case? And it's a 1-year business case, because in a way, platform has grown, generate. So as a result, it's always, it's almost like, what we haven't got returned by within 3 months. What's wrong? We don't want to touch that. While there's so many opportunities that could be responded to, that I just, it's hard. I don't name names, but it's I think a challenge that telcos at this very, they're losing business because they can't put investment in. They have to respond to this year's demands. As a result, they can play stuff that then end customers can start trialing and playing with, so that for next year they can then, they've got marketing, they've got sales, they've got all the other business aspects you need to have in line to then, make money with some of those net new capabilities. So a very good pain point you highlight there.
But even if you take the 5-year view, right, from a leadership perspective, it is, yes, the 5-year business case looks good, but it is returns in year 2 and 3 and 4, right? And you're asking me to take the risk in year 1. Well, the other projects which are bringing revenue in year 1, maybe I should invest those. And
exactly.
So there's no right answer. You just have to work through the organizational structure and make sure that you have the right support for your capability, right?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. It's almost to the point where, in some of these cases, I've argued the need to take it outside of business as usual. And for some of these investment opportunities, just have an incubator that just does it. We saw with Werner from Telenor how they've essentially been a separate network so that they can actually be freed from the organization to just take these risks, to just throw stuff out there and see how it sticks. So that's, I think, an interesting approach. And I'm also seeing, within the API teams, a sort of a split. So there's an operation we've just got to deliver to what the organization and customers need for this year, and we'll allow a couple of people on Friday afternoon to play around so that they can start experimenting with the customers, because in a lot of cases this actually has a customer drive for these new capabilities, but it's joint experimentation to see if this could be a new business opportunity.
And we do some of those through service designs and interviews with the customers and so forth, but it's still limited, right? From my perspective, I'd like to do more of it. And
well, it's fun, because it's uncharted territory. A lot of it is just day to day. It's going to work, and here's the return. When it's some of the new business opportunities, especially because they tend to be more on the AI or the IoT side, there's fun new stuff you can play with. But you're right, you have to make money, but it's getting that right balance, I think, is the challenge we're facing in the whole API management space. So that, I guess, covers in part question 10, which is how do you identify, prioritize which projects you focus on? But beyond immediate return, is there any other criteria you use?
We do, right? Because you want to look at the strategic value of the capability. How many other projects are you enabling? What are the initiatives you're enabling? Is the initiative you're enabling, part of the emerging business, the high growth area, right? You kind of, revenue is one of the numbers, and yes, it is a big one, and we focus on that. But you also have to balance it with the strategic value, and especially of the initiatives you're enabling. So if there's a capability that I can bring to the market which enables 5 different initiatives, even if 2 of those successfully take off as a hockey stick, you've got your returns on it, right? So that strategic value is the other piece we try to balance, other than the revenue, of course.
No, that's a good point. And then I guess the final one, and this really is the biggie, is, and this was from several telcos, so I sort of converted it into just one question, but there's a couple in there, is we struggle with culture. Many groups are dependent on traditional expensive vendors. How do we convert them to using APIs instead of expensive and slow system integration projects?
Right. And here, Telus, I think from our perspective, we did one of the smart things is right from the beginning, we've had a great portal where we have our APIs documented, all the information is published out there. So in the projects where we are integrating with our partners, we actually have no third-party integrators or, it's straight up, here's our APIs, this is how you use them, go call them, right?
Yep.
There's no third-party integration required. It's you know how to use APIs. Here's the documentation. Here's the test platform. Go integrate with us. Use those APIs. And when we are using the APIs internally, of course, it's our own teams. They have pretty much access to the same documentation. It's not like we have different documentation for internal, external. Maybe some APIs are only available internally, and they are visible on the internal portal. But this is a problem we kind of sidestepped by having good documentation, making it available out there, making it easy for our partners to use those APIs, have a good mechanism for us to test the APIs before you get into production.
Gotcha.
Thereby, we
No, I
eliminated
agree.
the need of the expensive integrators, period, right?
Yeah. I think possibly with Telus, there's a more open culture as well. That successfully around the organization. While in some telcos, it's quite interesting. Again, there's still a challenge with the API group in getting some of the more traditional groups to take advantage of the rather than doing the typical custom, either through a network equipment provider or with one of their local system integrators, a big sort of migration project on a legacy voice service that really, if they'd used an API platform, they could have, as you said, read the documentation and just done it.
Yep, exactly. But don't get me wrong. We within Telus as well, we have certain areas where we may not have the APIs, and then you go through that. There's no alternative, right? You do not have the APIs. You have to go through that migration process and the integration.
Exactly.
But
Gotcha.
where we do have APIs, and we leverage our partners to connect with us through those APIs, it's pretty straightforward. We have no third-party integrator.
Exactly.
I think
that's it, and that then removes so much cost, so much time. And
exactly, it's the time
let's face
that's
it,
really interesting, right? Because once you have the APIs, the integration is fast. At least you can very quickly test the customer experience and say this is what you want, and then launch it to the market, right?
Exactly. I mean, you are literally working in days, a few weeks. It's not months to years.
Absolutely.
I mean, we talk about this agility thing way too much. It's bandied around, but I think we're seeing now project after project where finally we're changing the customer's experience and being able to do things a lot better. And it being identified, or a new service, or a new capability being added, and getting it in front of the customers in a very open way that they can play with in those days to weeks. So it is nice to see in a lot of projects. But cool. Again, always fun to chat with you, Vinay. This is a topic, let's face it, we could spend weeks talking about because of all the cultural, organizational issues. And what I find interesting, because I sort of, am from the outside looking in, is all the different approaches we're seeing taken by all the different operators. It's like everybody is different and unique. They have some common problems, but how they've solved them, it's amazing to see just the variety of approaches. And that, again, that's something we try to do at TADSummit, is to bring together a lot of different operators that are taking different approaches. And exactly, it's on the ratings, right? They can or cannot adopt those capabilities. So again, thank you, Vinay. Excellent revisited with you, and fingers crossed we can get you to TADSummit later this year to get an update.
That sounds good, Alan. Look forward to seeing you at the next TADSummit.
That's great. Thank you so much, Vinay.